The day had been long, and it will drag on still. 8 o'clock hit, and it was time for the center to shut down for the night. Everyone had gotten their coats on and gathered all their items, eagerly waiting for the big hand to reach the 12. Sighs of relief and chatter broke out, mixing with the sound of the chairs squeaking and keyboards clattering. All the employees were more than ready to leave for the holidays, except me. The site director had appointed a very specific task for me to complete with a deadline. That deadline was today. Can you guess who doesn't get to go home yet? And why I haven't gotten it done yet? Because I had regular workload, and on top of that, the assignment was provided to me. It had to be done. I couldn't turn it down. This was my boss's boss. Even if it were I to say no, this also meant I would be missing out on a 4-figure bonus that was offered upon completion. So, I'm staying late tonight to finish. Hey, Milo, my man, Daniel said as he strode Milo's way. It looks like I'm the last one out for the night, except you and the maintenance crew. A ridiculously large set of keys dangled from his forefinger as he clinked slightly together one another. I'm going to lock up the door, but it's only locked from the outside. So when you leave, just make sure that the door is all the way shut. Oh, and one more thing. Daniel dug out of his pocket and pulled out a small slip of folded paper, tossing it to Milo's desk. That's the alarm code to set it right before you leave. It's an easy one, so you aren't likely to mess it up. You can still call me if you need help, though I might be a little tipsy. Daniel chuckled and gave Milo an over-exaggerated wink. Milo took the paper from his desk and opened it to find a 5-digit code. He nodded once. Seems easy enough. All right then. Sounds good. See you on the flip side of the holidays, man. Daniel began walking away when he stopped on his heel and turned. Oh, and another thing. The lights automatically cut off to like 15% or whatever when it hits 10, so don't let that spook you. All right. Milo chuckled and gave Daniel a wave before Daniel disappeared out the door. Milo could faintly hear the mechanisms inside the door turning against one another, then the sound of a key being removed. Milo looked down at the clock on the computer screen and realized that the 2 hours had already passed. He was only 3/4 of the way done. Before beginning earlier, it was already at half past the mark. If I'm not done with this by midnight, he thought as he ran his fingers through his hair. At least I'm getting overtime for this too. Maybe a quick stretch of my legs to the men's room will help. Scooting his chair away from his desk, he allowed himself to spin slightly and tossed his headset in his leather seat. He began stretching as he felt his knees pop when he heard another sound come from behind. Wiping a smile from his haggard face, he turned and said, "Hey!" Furrowing his brow, he did not see anyone behind him. Could have swore that was maintenance. With a shrug of his shoulders, he began walking towards the nearest restroom. This office was anything but small, however. The center was a 1-story facility that covered nearly 30,000 square feet in the office space. They ensured that each employee had their own personal space with an assigned cubicle, rather than hoping to get the same one each day. Those days were long gone in his life, thankfully. However, the building itself, without all the hustle and bustle of the other 600 employees, made it rather intimidating. Sue was not on her personal phone and sneaking glances over her cubicle to see if the boss was close by. Bill and Alan were not shooting the breeze loudly several cubicles down. Richard, also known by everyone here as the keyboard rapist, was not heard beating the hell out of his keyboard while responding to his emails. Karen was not seen running to the bathroom every half hour in her unrealistically tall high heels and miniskirt that her plump bottom half tried to escape from with each step. Gary was not talking louder than everyone close by, as if he thought it was a contest. All that could be heard was silence. But then he picked up on something else. He stopped walking to cease the horrific carpet below his feet from crunching under his weight and listened. It sounded like the other side of the center was still teeming with life. Faint murmuring could be heard that sounded identical to the daily chatter of employees. As he checked his watch, it showed that it was already right at 10. No one but maintenance should be here. The murmuring sounded like too many of them to be surely the maintenance crew. He considered going to investigate it, but then thought better of it. He was not a manager. He was not even someone who had power other than being seasoned. It was probably a group who may have had their own project going.
But wouldn't Daniel have told you about them before leaving? So you would not set the alarm on them by accident?
He pursed his lips as he entered the bathroom. It was disturbing during this hour. He could not recall a time that he had been in the restroom alone since he started working here. There was always at least 2 or 3 others occupying the stalls or urinals. Stepping in front of the urinal, he unzipped his jeans and began relieving himself when the lights darkened significantly. As he glanced up, he noticed that 3 of the overhead lights were still on, but only 2 of the 5 long bulbs inside of it were lit. They were spaced out, one every 5. How creepy, he thought. As he finished up and turned to the sinks to wash his hands, he heard a strange sound in one of the far stalls. Glancing to the hall of the stalls on either side, he listened carefully when he picked up on the sound of murmuring. That's odd. I should not be able to hear them still while in here. Another faint noise came from the far end of the hallway of stalls. Hello? He called just above a whisper.
What the hell am I doing? It's probably just the trash settling. Someone probably threw away like half a bottle of soda or something. Or it's just the weird squares in the ceiling settling. I would have heard maintenance. They have a big keychain full of keys that make a lot of ruckus.
He brushed it off and began washing his hands at the sink, running the tap on high. Warm water pooled in his cupped hands, spilling over the sides as he brought them up and splashed it on his face. It was soothing as his tired lids as he let out a sigh. Wiping the excess water from his eyes, he opened them back up to see something out of the corner of his eye disappear. Jerking his head in the direction he thought he saw the movement, he heard a single footstep and nothing more. Who's there? The murmuring had ceased as he listened for any other sound. The hair on his arms raised as the air felt crisp chill drift when the soft hum of the heat came on. While keeping an eye on the hall of stalls, he took 3 steps towards the hand towels and took 2 out. He dared not use the hand dryer. It was much too loud for his comfort right now. He thought of how he always used it during normal hours. This was a courtesy in a way, he thought. Those who sat in the stalls with their guts growling fiercely from the poor meal choices, this gave them a small window to bellow their rank air into the toilet bowls. But there was no one to provide this kindness to now. He was alone. At least on this side of the center. He would have to end up investigating this before leaving. This is, if he still heard the conversation before he left for the holidays. He thought better of checking the stalls, as he was sure it was just his exhaustion beginning to catch up to him. If he wanted out of there before midnight, he needed to go ahead and get a move on. Shoving the door, he slithered through quickly and walked back to his cubicle. The east wing his cubicle sat at was darker than it had been in the bathroom. He could still see, but the light of his screen was the only thing that illuminated his desk enough to clearly see his keyboard. As he sat back in his chair and heard the air released within the cushion, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes.
I really need to get this done. I know my tiredness is catching up to me.
He opened his eyes and saw someone sitting at Jason's cubicle behind him. The longer he stared, it seemed like there really was a silhouette of a person sitting in Jason's chair. The silhouette was not moving. There did not appear to be any outline of hair on them, but the shape of their head appeared to be smooth. When he thought the person was perhaps bald, he realized that the shapes were much too smooth to be natural. He did not see the shape of ears on the person. He did not see the outline of a collared shirt or any other upper body wear. It was almost like a cardboard cutout, but they forgot to leave their ears. He knew better. The folks here, especially the geeks, were prone to playing pranks on one another. One of them must have caught wind of Milo staying late tonight and thought it would be funny to spook him. The silhouette's head turned completely around rapidly with 2 solid spheres stared at him wide-eyed. Milo gasped as he tried to get out of his chair quickly. One of the handles underneath got caught on his pant leg and caused the chair to buckle back, flipping him backward with a loud bang. His foot hit the underneath of his desk as he hurled back, causing all of his knickknacks to jump in unison. Milo jumped to his feet and stared at Jason's empty chair as his skin prickled. Sweat began to bead on his face and neck as his skin felt low heat rising from his chest. He glanced around, but he saw nothing, out of the ordinary at least. He then braced his cubicle for support and stood on his toes to peer over the rows and rows of them to see if anyone was lurking nearby. But alas, he saw nothing but the ocean of empty desks. The murmuring caught his ears again as he glanced around once more. Looking down to his feet, he wiped his brow and sighed softly.
Just get your stupid project done so you can get the hell out of here. The security would have said something by now if someone were here that wasn't supposed to be. They do have a security guard who watches. That and maintenance is still here. It could have been something weird they were doing.
Taking his chair and setting it back upright, he sat his rump down in it and dared not to lean back again. He felt the air chilled around him again, but did not hear the sound of the heat coming on. The murmuring continued on. Enough of this. Taking his earphones, he shoved the buds in each ear and turned some of his favorite tunes on to drown out the eerie sounds. This would help him focus on his work and get the damn thing done. He brought the program back into view and looked over the spreadsheet with all his cheats on it, reviewing its contents. Hitting the Alt and Tab keys, he glanced back and forth between the files and programs and found where he had last stopped. With a nod of his head, he began typing and clicking around, hopping back on the task. Mark sighed as his chair creaked. He wished that the night would go by quicker than its snail-like speed. Kicking his feet up on the large desk piled with wrappers and empty coffee cups, he looked at his phone and opened up one of his games. One of the wrappers slipped off into the floor, taking 2 empty cups with it. His thick mustache hair fluttered as he breathed heavily with a sigh. I'll get it in a moment, he muttered. Placing his hands on his plump belly, he used it as a cushion to set them on as he played his game. That Milo kid's awful skittish, isn't he? He has already fell over in his chair backwards, unless the dumbass is high or drunk. It is the holidays, and he is alone after all. Maintenance has the night off since the site is closed for 4 days straight. I wish I was that lucky. Once he leaves, I can start watching my soaps. The camera on the south wing near the sales floor flashed. Mark leaned up with a heavy groan as he watched it closely. Nothing appeared to be going on. Sometimes the shift of light can set off the motion inside and that be it, but Mark felt a hunch. He was not sure what or why, but perhaps it was because the Milo kid was staying over and was supposed to keep an eye on him. He rewound the footage to a few seconds before it detected motion and hit play. As he watched, he noticed something in the far corner moving rapidly. Reminding it once more, he zoomed in on the corner and hit play again. Slowing the footage down, it looked like someone's hand, then a leg and a foot appearing, as if someone were crawling on all fours. Well, that's queer, Mark whispered. He played it once more and took several screenshots. Moving over to the central computer, he set the south cameras to high sensitivity and watched them one by one flash their message on the upper portion of each screen. Motion detected. The hell? On each camera, he noticed the same thing on them as the first one. It was as if the silhouettes were moving about, crawling on their hands and feet. It was a strange sight to see, as human legs were much longer than their arms. These things seemed to have the same length on their arms and legs like an animal. What was even more strange was these silhouettes were much too large to be rats or rodents of any sort. Even for a massive raccoon or possum, they were much too large. Then again, they were shaped like a human. The shadows crawled around in the oddest manner. He must be seeing things, he considered. Then again, he had not noticed these things before, and he had been the security guard for here well over 2 years now. He honed in on one of them and watched each screen carefully to keep track of the midst of the others. It seemed to be following a pattern. What was this? It crawled through an area where the bathroom was and stopped for a moment before continuing on and arriving at one of the sales department desks. It stopped at the cubicle and looked around, then climbed into the chair. The chair did not move in the slightest as it got on the cushion. Mark furrowed his brow as he leaned in closer to the screen and stared at the thing. It seemed to just sit there in his seat and stare at the dark screen in front of it. What is this? Mark leaned back and returned his sights to the east wing, where the Milo kid sat in his own cubicle. He noticed on other cameras close by that there seemed to be teeming with too much life for it to be nearing midnight. He then noticed that most of the cubicles were filled with one silhouette in each chair. Milo did not seem to notice. He was much too absorbed in his work as he stared at his screen. Mark watched his fingers tapping away at the keyboard and occasionally go to the mouse, then back to the board. Mark considered trying to get in touch with the kid, but decided he was hesitant about going out on the floor where the shadows were. He then saw a shadow walk up to Milo's desk, but stood directly behind his chair. It appeared to be staring directly at the back of his head. The hair on Mark's arms rose as goosebumps spread across his skin. Milo sighed as he removed his headphones. This was beginning to be too much for his head to work with and at this hour. Thankfully, only a 1/12 of the work remained. He had sped through the last bit, getting a bit more hang of the task he was working on. He scratched his head and stretched his stiff legs, feeling the stillness of the past 2 hours catching up to him. He felt up to getting a small snack to help him push through the remainder of the 4-figure task that was nearly complete. Opening the drawer on the side of the desk, he searched around for something light to munch on. Flicking the pack of gum to the side, it made a small clink against the metal. He noticed a slight movement out of the corner of his eye as he took hold of his snacky cake. Turning in his chair, he looked up and saw a thin silhouette standing behind him, staring down on him. Its saddened eyes glowed brightly in the dark. A dimmer light seemed to be coming from its eyes and seemed to be sliding down its face. Its mouth opened and let out a sound of distorted grief, almost as if it stifled a sob. Milo slid his chair back as it hit the desk and stared up at the skinny figure that looked down on him.
Well, I mean,
Its voice sounded warped, fading in and out as it spoke, but it seemed somehow familiar. What? He thought as his eyes grew wide. The ends of his fingers began to prickle as a cold sensation shot down his spine. Megan? Milo whispered. It cried in a bone-chilling shrill. Milo had not seen the others sitting in the surrounding cubicles until all the glowing eyes turned to him. Several stood while the others crawled towards him, and the shadow that sounded like Megan and was shaped as she, the one that was in Jason's chair, walked to the Megan-shaped shadow and raised its arms, wrapping them around the Megan imitation. The Megan's imitation turned and placed its head in the other's chest, or what Milo thought would be its chest. From his left, he saw one crawl over to the two standing and looked up to them and seemed uninterested. It swiftly made a detour and left the scene. Milo stood from his chair as his legs nearly crumpled beneath him. He pushed past the shadows and ran to the bathroom. Shoving his hands in front of him, the heavy door went flying open, hitting the tile behind it with a loud bang. As he entered the bathroom, he saw a particularly large shadow standing in front of the mirror with its hands planted on the sink counter. Milo saw himself staring at the other shadow from his reflection, but the shadow had none. The shadow turned to him and seemed to have the same expression that the Megan imitation had. Two hands slammed against the glass from the other side as a foggy silhouette appeared and its mouth opened, letting out an agonizing cry. The shadow looked down to the sink and spoke again. He only knew the one person shaped like that and who he had seen do that before. Drew? He could hear his voice shaking. Milo took a step back, and as he felt his legs go numb, the foggy silhouette in the mirror removed its hands from the glass and grabbed its head as it let out another pained wail. Behind him came the sound of running footsteps as he turned in time to see another figure with its hand over its mouth would be. It sprinted into one of the stalls, preceded by the echo of warped vomiting. Milo's legs buckled beneath him as he began kicking his feet on the floor and backing his way out of the bathroom. His lungs were on fire as he fought with himself not to begin hyperventilating. Each time he breathed in, it was as if no oxygen was received. His heart pounded loudly in his chest and could be heard thumping in his head. Quickly turning to the call floor, he did not see anything or anyone. All that could be seen were all empty, dark cubicles, except for his own where the monitor was still lit. All the shadows had vanished. Digging his hand into his pocket as he stood shakily, he located his phone. He pulled it aggressively from his pocket and searched through his contacts. With each ring, his hope began to fall further. Hello? Oh, thank God. I didn't think I was going to... Hello? Yeah, hey, can you hear me? Yeah, I can't hear you. That's because you reached my voicemail. Psych! You asshole. Milo thought bitterly. Daniel, you need to call me as soon as you get this. There's something weird going on. Call me. Placing his phone back into his pocket again, he took a glance around the office floor. He could still faintly hear the sound of voices, but could not tell where they were coming from. Wait a minute. I feel like I remember the administrator mentioned something about this when I spoke to them. Something about psychological effect to unconsciously soothe the employees who work on the phones. So if one was on the phone, but all of his colleagues around him were not, it would reassure them in some form they didn't feel alone? Some kind of crap that I do not fully understand, but maybe this is what they were talking about. But one of the shadows. Surely I'm not just hallucinating from being so tired. There's not any way in hell that this can actually be happening. Feeling as though his legs were ready to begin obeying him again, he slowly got to his feet. As he looked around, he considered leaving now and forgetting the 4-figure bonus. However, how would he explain to his boss why it wasn't done? How much regret he would swallow once tomorrow came. Then he realized he may even be fired since the deadline was tomorrow, and his boss would be furious for failing him. Failing to let him know that he was not capable of doing this project and allowing his boss to find another candidate to take Milo's place. The motivation to remain here and finish out the project returned like a trickling stream. It was not much, but it was still something to cling onto and utilize. Dragging one foot in front of the other, he made his way back to his cubicle to find his drawer still open and a snacky cake was thrown across his desk. With a heavy sigh, he sat back down in his chair as he let out a small hiss of air escaping from the cushion. It was surprising how quiet it seemed to have grown, though the low murmur of conversation was still there. Placing his earbuds back in, he tore the snacky cake wrapper from the sugary delight. Cramming half of the cake in his mouth, he looked at the screen. Gazing over the spreadsheet of numbers and the occasional side notes off to the side, he refreshed himself on where he left off. The thought of him not being alone remained in the back of his mind as he tried to focus on the numbers ahead of him. Nevertheless, he continued to try to convince himself that it was just stress-induced hallucinations and nothing more. He had heard of people being under such massive amounts of stress that they began having hallucinations. It was not unheard of. He went to another tab on his browser and turned on some low, soothing music, just loud enough to cover the murmur, but not overwhelming when he was trying to work. Let's drown out the voices and get to work, he thought. Mark continued to watch the Milo kid in fascination, and the fact that the shadows had appeared like this. Was this a trick of his mind? He began asking himself. Yet when he rewound some of the tape's footage, he was able to see the shadows moving about once again. He had sent the footage over to a colleague of his and watched security during the day at the center. However, Mark was left on red. He had hoped that Eugene would have been able to shed some light on this and what he thought. It was then that he saw the message bubble pop up showing that Eugene was typing. Oh, thank goodness, Mark thought. The message read, Hey Mark, I looked at the footage several times. I'm not seeing anything on there like you mentioned. Where exactly does it happen? Can you give me a timestamp or something? Mark stared at the screen, hardly able to believe what he was reading. Scrolling up to the video, he hit play and watched the one he sent to him again. Maybe something did not carry over when he sent it? He did not know what could have possibly caused that, but there was still a slim chance. As he watched, he clearly saw the movements in the clip. He then responded to Eugene. "How are you not able to see this? There's movement all over that clip." Send. Eugene is typing. "Is this a joke, Mark?" Mark stared at the screen a moment, feeling his face grow red. He was not sure if it was humiliation or embarrassment that he was feeling. He decided not to respond and would ask administration to have a look once they were back in the office after the holidays. Surely there had to be a logical explanation as to why Eugene didn't see it. He watched the clip once more just to clarify that he did indeed see them for himself. After reassuring himself, he saved multiple clips to the USB and stashed it in his personal bag. Turning back to the screen, he saw the Milo kid standing up to leave his workstation and restarted his computer. It looked like he had finally finished his project. He had such a sluggish step in his walk that concerned Mark that he might fall asleep while driving home. With a shake of his head, he reminded himself that he was not responsible for Milo after he leaves the building. So until Milo's out the door and leaves the parking lot, he watched him closely. He seemed to be fumbling with something in his pocket and having a hard time gripping it, whatever it was, as he was trying to pull it out of his pocket. After several moments, he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and brought it rather close to his face as he squinted. Holding the paper in one hand, he flipped the plate down on the security system and began typing in the numbers. One of the monitors flashed in front of Mark, showing the system on the east wing would be alarming itself in 15 seconds. Milo stepped out the door as several snowflakes blew inside and shut the door behind him. Mark then moved his eyes to the outside cameras as he watched Milo slowly walk to the only remaining car in the employee's parking lot with his collar up for his jacket as he pulled it against his neck. He then dropped his keys several times before finally able to unlock the door and get in the vehicle. Mark watched for what felt like a full 5 minutes before the lights came on the car. He watched Milo's car went painfully slow to the exit of the parking lot before pulling out onto the highway. The taillights finally disappeared as Mark sighed and leaned back in his chair as he stared at the ceiling. A small ding went off as Mark leaned up to see motion detected in the east wing. Looking over the screen, he saw the shadows beginning their crawls and walks again. Chills surged through his body as he looked at one of the monitors and saw a shadow sitting at Milo's desk now. He zoomed in slightly to see the same slouched posture that Milo has when he's sitting at his desk. Furrowing his brow and staring at the figure, it just sat there staring at the dark monitor, slouched tiredly in its chair. It then stood slowly from its chair and walked to the bathroom. Within several minutes, the figure came strolling back out of the bathroom, scratching its head. It finally made its way back to the chair when it sat back down and stared ahead again. Mark was unsure of what to do. He decreased the sensitivity on the motion sensors and looked at his phone to recollect himself. He had worked there for a good while now, but had never encountered this before. It was then he recalled that he was on a new medication for his cholesterol. Maybe this was one of the side effects that he was experiencing. Yeah, he murmured to himself as he lowered his phone. Gazing at the camera, he saw that one of the figures at the desk appeared to be crying, the same motions of its hands covering its face while it propped itself up on its elbows on the desk. Its back moved slightly up and down as if it were sobbing. It's just a side effect. This will pass and things will be right back to normal. Moving his eyes back to the Milo kid's cubicle, he saw the figure lay its head down on the desk as if it were resting his eyes.